I think actually I'm now going to term this Britain's favourite Sunday sermon, because I think and hope optimistically that this is listened to and watched by more people than any other sermon across the United Kingdom. And this week I want to focus on an extraordinary thing, because I believe that another 2 nails have been hammered into the coffin of net zero. Yes, I think 2 nails have been hammered into the net zero coffin. A small nail in Cambridge, where the city council there, the Labour-run city council with lots of Lib Dems as well, they've actually scrapped their planned congestion charge, a sort of tax on the poorest. They've actually scrapped it. Sadiq Khan, are you listening? That's the first nail in the coffin of net zero. And the other larger nail, which has massive implications that I'll be talking about in the first hour, is that this week was the total failure of the auction for bids for new offshore wind farms. 5 were offered up, 0 bids were received by the government from all the developers for their contracts, for their subsidy amounts, and that is a defining moment for the huge offshore wind turbine industry, remembering that we are the largest offshore wind industry in the Western world, second in the world, I think, only to China. Now, I called peak net zero a few weeks ago after the Uxbridge by-election, and I think we are seeing some more nails being hammered into the net zero coffin. Now, at this point, some of the zealots who are listening and trying to catch me out and trip me up, they'll be reaching for the smelling salts. They'll be reaching a little bit early for the gin. They'll be calling for me to be cancelled. But listen carefully, folks. Listen. We all care about the environment. We all want cleaner air. But the environment that we enjoy in the United Kingdom, the glorious landscape, much of which, of course, has transformed because of how we look after it, superbly. That is different to climate change around the planet, which has existed for billions of years and always will, of course. And I've yet to see any scientific evidence that if you get to net zero, climate change that has existed for billions of years before man-made CO2 existed, I've not seen any evidence that climate change will stop. Even the IPCC admits, actually, if you delve into its report, that the thing most people are worried about, or very worried about amongst others, sea level rise, that won't stop if we get to net zero for not 5 years, not 10 years. The IPCC say with high confidence, you'll be pleased to know, that it might change between 200 and 1,000 years out from now. I mean, really? Where's the common sense in that? I think that actually common sense is winning. I think nails are being hammered into the madness of the net zero coffin. And always trust your gut instinct. When you know something's wrong, you can't quite prove it. But the context here is important. It's not a coincidence that our electricity prices have risen sharply in the last 15 years as we have developed the biggest offshore wind industry in the world. They are directly linked because of the vast subsidies paid to the developers, which now, including all the network operating costs and the fact that it's inflation linked, and guess where inflation is around £15 billion every single year. And whether it's direct to you or indirect via businesses who then charge it on to you, the consumer, that's about £500 per household per year of the cost of the renewable energy industry. Now, last year in 2022, there were some more offshore bids by the developers, and they came in at a remarkably low figure of just over £37 per megawatt hour was the sort of the guaranteed subsidy that they wanted. Extraordinarily, despite the extra costs of offshore wind development and construction compared to the much simpler process of building turbines onshore, those bids came in about 15% lower than the bids for onshore. And that, I smelt a rat then. I thought something was going on. And of course, gas prices at the time were higher. My belief, and this is the thing, my concern is that there is a cartel operating that last year deliberately, knowingly underbid in order to boost the renewables industry, the offshore wind industry, to the detriment of the gas generating industry. And they thought, well, we'll be able to increase the prices and it's not legally binding anyway, so we can sell at higher market prices. And I think they conspired to organise this. And if you do that, then actually that is a cartel. And already, a year later, they've been asking for higher prices because of inflation, because the cost of the turbines has gone up and the cost of debt has gone up. Of those 5 last year, 1 has already been cancelled. And I think that some of the others are literally just treading water and are likely to be cancelled or postponed or not bid. Now, this year, something different. The government said that actually, when you bid, it will be legally binding to sell electricity at that price. It won't be an option like in previous years, which has been a wonderful get-out clause for the offshore wind developers. And guess what? Not a single bid this year. And the industry has been saying for months, oh, it's going to be the cap you're putting on it of £44 is too tight because of inflation. OK, well, if that's the case, why didn't some of them bid saying, look, we can't bid at your cap price of 44, but we would like to bid at 55 or 60 because we'd still like to build it. Let's talk about it. No, not a single one of them put that forward. Now, I've been in the commercial world. I know in a truly competitive situation, developers will always try and find a way to negotiate. And I find it extraordinary that there was not a single bid that said we can't quite do that price, but we can do this slightly higher price. My belief is that the truth is that the price they needed to make this work is so much higher that it would be actually embarrassing for everybody, for the developers, for the government, for the zealots, from the eco-cultists. It would not only be embarrassing, it would be humiliating. I suspect they need a return of somewhere much closer to £100 a megawatt hour. So they all concluded that it's better not to bid at all. The question is, though, now you see, actually, the zealots can't say that it's cheaper than gas because the gas prices come tumbling down to sort of much nearer sort of 10-year average levels and probably trending further down. This is a defining moment. We are potentially seeing the end of the whole of the offshore wind industry, on which the whole of the net zero calculations over the next 35 years are calculated. Sorry, 25 years. This is how seismic this is. Because all of the calculations fall apart if the offshore wind industry can no longer make it work financially. Unless the government allows them wriggle room. Unless the government says, well, actually, we will increase the price. Now, playing the other side of the coin, there is a genuine case to say, if you're going to have a mix of different energy sources, you want some renewables, you want some gas, you want some nuclear, you want some tidal, you might want some hydrogen, a spread across the piece, that some will be more expensive than others and that will vary. And I can take that. If that's what the industry was saying, fine. For whatever percentage you want, 15, 20%. But of course, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is you should get rid of all the gas generating industry, because the renewables are cheaper and they will permanently be cheaper. And that is a lie. That is a con. So this is a really significant moment. The whole industry has to come clean. What is the genuine price they need in order to be able to develop offshore wind turbines? You've got wind turbine manufacturers. I mean, Siemens just recently declared, I think, about £1 billion loss in their turbine division. Others have got similar problems. The costs have gone up, the debt costs have gone up, the turbine costs have gone up. Huge increases. And I think this is absolutely seismic. And so for all of those last year who were saying that the cost of offshore wind was 6 or 8 or 9 times cheaper than gas, that whole thing is out the window, gone, finished, over. don't they dare ever say that again. The truth is that at the moment, the whole net zero calculations for the United Kingdom, the 2050 targets, is basically in the bin because the offshore wind industry cannot produce and does not want to admit the price at which they need in order to develop offshore wind farms. And I think that's quite telling. And I think if they're going to be genuine and open and transparent, they need to come forward and tell us what is the real price. And isn't it funny? Last year, the offshore bids were cheaper than the onshore bids. And this year, we're now hearing as Sunak starts to relax the ban on onshore wind, one of the reasons is because onshore is cheaper to develop than offshore. Hang on, last year it was the opposite. Who's telling the truth? That's why I think this is dodgy. That's why I think something isn't right. That's why I'm afraid, folks, I think we're being lied to by a great deal of people and the vested interests in this business. And let me just conclude by reminding you, the thing about wind and the sun is the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So renewables are great when they do, but guess what? You need a backup when they don't, unless your backup is candles. And I don't define that as progress. So it's pretty basically obvious that the cost of renewables plus backup must be more than the cost of backup, which is what we had before. Do you see? Now, those on the other side will say, no, the operating cost of renewables is free. The wind is free once you've built it. But they are being financially clueless and utterly illiterate, because to have the backup, you have to pay for it. You've got standby operating costs. You've got the capital cost of building it, yes. And when people spend money, they want a return on their money. These illiterate people are not telling all of us the truth. This is a seismic moment in the whole net zero debate. The calculations are thrown out the window. It's game over. What staggers me is that lots of smart, normally intelligent journalists in respectable papers are actually lamenting this, rather than questioning whether or not we've been conned, whether we've been fibbed. They're sort of saying the government have got this wrong. No, the government have. The government actually, credit where credit's due, they've called the industry out and they said, what's the real number? We're going to put a maximum, we're going to hold you to it, and the industry's bottled it. And this is really significant. I'm going to keep asking for this information because I think there's a cartel going on here. We haven't been told the truth. And if I'm right, then the whole of net zero is falling apart in front of our eyes in terms of the calculations. And that's before we even talk about the energy bill that was laid before Commons in the last week. I'll be talking about that next week. But for the moment, just focus on this sermon, on those nails that have been hammered into the coffin of net zero. The Cambridge congestion charge ditched. The offshore wind industry, certainly temporarily, ditched for new development, for new turbines, unless there's a bit of honesty, a bit of truth, and a reassessment of what's expensive, what's value for money, and what's cheap. And here endeth Britain's favourite Sunday sermon.